Today, I am thrilled to introduce you to the Open Group Architecture Framework, more commonly known as TOGAF. TOGAF has emerged as the gold standard for enterprise architecture, providing organizations with a comprehensive methodology to effectively design, plan, implement, and govern their architectures. TOGAF, developed and maintained by the Open Group, offers a systematic approach to enterprise architecture, enabling businesses to align their IT strategies with their overall business objectives. It provides a common language and set of tools that bridge the gap between business and technology, ensuring seamless communication and collaboration. It serves as a blueprint for architects, guiding them in developing architectures that address complex challenges and deliver strategic value. The ADM is a method of developing architectures on different levels: business, application, data, technology, that enable the architect to ensure that a complex set of requirements are adequately addressed. ADM consists of 10 distinct phases, each with its objectives, steps, inputs, and outputs. In the preliminary phase, we lay the foundation for the architecture development process, establishing the groundwork necessary to initiate and support successful architecture initiatives. Activities in this phase include understanding the business environment, identifying drivers and goals for architecture development, and defining the scope and constraints that will guide the architecture work. Additionally, during the preliminary phase, we establish governance and support mechanisms to ensure effective architecture development and implementation. This includes defining architecture principles and policies. The outputs of the preliminary phase include the request for architecture work, which captures the formal request to begin the architecture development process and initiates the next steps. Architecture principles are also defined, serving as the guiding rules and values for making architectural decisions. Furthermore, the architecture governance framework is established, providing the structure and processes for managing and governing the architecture throughout its life cycle. Phase A architecture vision of the TOGAF architecture development method, ADM, focuses on establishing the foundation for the architecture development process. The primary objective is to define the scope, constraints, and expectations for the iteration and validate the business context. This phase involves creating the architecture vision and obtaining approval for the statement of architecture work. First, a high-level vision is developed to outline the desired capabilities and business value of the proposed enterprise architecture. This vision considers stakeholder concerns, identifies business requirements, and evaluates the readiness for business transformation. It also involves confirming and elaborating business goals, drivers, and constraints. Additionally, the architecture principles are established, including the business principles that will guide decision-making throughout the architecture development process. The scope of the architecture effort is defined, and the architecture vision is created to describe the desired target state. This includes refining key stakeholder requirements and identifying value propositions and key performance indicators, KPIs, associated with the target architecture. Risks related to the business transformation are assessed, and mitigation activities are identified. The statement of architecture work is developed, outlining the program of works necessary to develop and deploy the architecture. This document is crucial as it defines the specific activities and deliverables for the architecture development cycle. Throughout Phase A, the architecture repository is populated with relevant information, including existing architecture documentation. This helps provide a comprehensive understanding of the organization's current state and supports decision-making in developing the architecture vision. In conclusion, Phase A sets the stage for the architecture development process by establishing the necessary groundwork. It ensures clarity on the scope, constraints, and goals of the architecture initiative, and it secures approval for the statement of architecture work. Phases B, C, and D of the TOGAF architecture development method, ADM, play vital roles in the architecture development process. In Phase B, the business architecture phase, the focus is on developing a holistic representation of the organization's capabilities, value delivery, information, and organizational structure. This phase aims to define the target business architecture that aligns with the strategic drivers outlined in the architecture vision and addresses stakeholder concerns. During Phase B, activities include developing the baseline and target business architecture descriptions, performing gap analysis, defining components for the architecture roadmap, resolving impacts across the architecture landscape, conducting formal stakeholder reviews, and finalizing the business architecture. The outputs of Phase B include the draft architecture definition document, architecture requirements specification, and business architecture components for the architecture roadmap. Moving to Phase C, the Information Systems Architecture phase, the objective is to develop the architecture for information systems that support the business goals defined in Phase B. This involves creating the target information systems architecture, which outlines the structure and interaction of the information systems necessary to support the business architecture. Activities in Phase C encompass developing the baseline and target data and application architecture descriptions, conducting gap analysis, defining components for the architecture roadmap, resolving impacts, conducting stakeholder reviews, and finalizing the information systems architecture. The outputs of Phase C include the draft architecture definition document, architecture requirements specification, and information systems architecture components for the architecture roadmap. Finally, in Phase D, the technology architecture phase, the focus shifts to developing the architecture for the technology infrastructure required to support the information systems defined in Phase C. The goal is to define the target technology architecture, which outlines the necessary technology infrastructure, platforms, and interoperability requirements. Phase D activities involve developing the baseline and target technology architecture descriptions, performing gap analysis, defining components for the architecture roadmap, resolving impacts, conducting stakeholder reviews, and finalizing the technology architecture. The outputs of Phase D include the draft architecture definition document, architecture requirements specification, and technology architecture components for the architecture roadmap. By progressing through Phases B, C, and D, we establish a comprehensive and integrated architecture that aligns with business goals, information systems requirements, and technology infrastructure needs. This provides a solid foundation for the subsequent phases of the architecture development process. Phase E, called Opportunities and Solutions, focuses on implementing the target architecture. Its main objectives include generating the architecture roadmap, determining the implementation approach, defining solution building blocks, and assessing readiness and risks for business transformation. Inputs include various documents and outputs consist of the updated architecture vision, architecture definition document, architecture requirements specification, architecture roadmap, and initial implementation and migration plan. Phase F, Migration Planning, finalizes the implementation and migration plan for transitioning from the baseline to the target architectures. It coordinates the plan with the enterprise's overall change portfolio, confirms stakeholder understanding of business value and costs, and establishes management framework interactions. Key outputs include the finalized architecture definition document, architecture requirements specification, architecture roadmap, and implementation governance model. Phase G, Implementation Governance, ensures conformance with the target architecture, monitors implementation projects, and produces a signed architecture contract. Its objectives include confirming adherence to the architecture, performing governance functions, and guiding solution development. Inputs include relevant documents, and outputs consist of the signed architecture contract, compliance assessments, implemented solutions, and updated architectural artifacts. Phase H, Architecture Change Management, ensures controlled management of architecture changes. Objectives include maintaining the architecture lifecycle, executing the architecture governance framework, meeting enterprise architecture capability requirements, establishing a value realization process, managing risks, and providing analysis for change management. Inputs include relevant documents, and outputs consist of updated architecture, framework changes, and updated governance artifacts. Requirements management is a crucial process that spans all phases of the ADM cycle. Its objectives are to sustain the process, manage architecture requirements, and ensure their availability for each phase. It involves identifying, storing, and incorporating requirements, monitoring changes, assessing impacts, implementing requirements, and updating the architecture requirements repository. Inputs are requirements-related outputs from ADM phases, while outputs include changed requirements and the requirements impact assessment. This process enables effective management and integration of architecture requirements throughout the ADM cycle. In conclusion, the TOGAF Architecture Development Method (ADM) provides a structured framework for developing and managing enterprise architectures. From the preliminary phase to the final change management phase, the ADM guides organizations in creating a holistic architecture that aligns with business goals and addresses stakeholder needs. By following the ADM, organizations can achieve effective architecture development, smooth implementation, and continuous improvement. The TOGAF ADM empowers businesses to navigate complex architectural challenges and drive successful enterprise transformations. Thank you for your time.